Now, please welcome our colleague and well-known, admired by many of us, Brent Assink.
My goodness, that's a long walk. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jesse, for those kind words. It's great to be with all of you here in Dallas. Beautiful, rainy Dallas. So, San Francisco Symphony turned 100 this year, and I have one piece of wisdom to share with all of you. This was not a surprise. We knew it was coming. We planned it for 5 years, and for those of us who have had significant birthdays that have ended in 0, I would suggest to you that we tend to do one of two things, or sometimes both things, on that big anniversary day. We celebrate and we reflect. The San Francisco Symphony did both, and the part that was about reflecting really was the American Orchestra Forum, a chance for us to talk with colleagues both inside the field and outside the field about various aspects of our lives together. And this was supported by the Mellon Foundation. And we talked about three major themes. The first was community. What is and should be an orchestra's relationship with its community? Second was creativity. How do orchestras work creatively off the stage as well as on? And third, audience. How are we responding to our audience's changing attitudes and needs? These are all big questions, and I'm going to come back to them in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to discuss with you the overall context of our theme today, which is, as Jesse said, innovation. Let's start by considering what that commonly used word means in our field, and then get back to community, creativity, and audience. As Jesse said, innovation is everywhere. We hear about it over and over. It's a cover story of the Harvard Business Review. And we will hear a lot more about it later today. A major California foundation makes innovation grants. And just recently, our music director, Michael Tilson-Thomas, declared that orchestras have an imperative to innovate. Back in March, at the American Orchestra Forum session, Ed Sanders, who as Google's chief ran the astonishing YouTube Symphony Orchestra project, said, quote, "The institutions that can be shown to be experimenting and pushing innovation forward rather than standing still are the ones who are going to survive. You can either be terrified by it or you can let go a little bit and see what happens," end quote. Let go a little bit. This is somebody from Google who says, let go a little bit. And as the San Francisco Symphony has looked back at its first century, we see that our orchestra, and many others represented here today, has in fact been an innovator throughout our history. We played a central role in advancing some of the key technological innovations of the 20th century: radio broadcasts, recorded music, movies with soundtracks, live television broadcasts. These in turn pushed the boundaries of our art form in creative and dynamic ways. And as delighted as we are with that legacy of innovation, the rate of technological change in the world around us has accelerated dramatically in this century, and it is now we who struggle to keep up. It's worth reminding ourselves that only 10 years ago, there were no iPhones, no YouTube, no Facebook, or Twitter. How did we survive? As the rate of change has accelerated, we face a mounting pressure to innovate in response to the impact these new technologies are having on every facet of contemporary life. We are finding ourselves trying to catch up. And this new level of challenge came up throughout our American Orchestra Forum conversations. Before we explore in greater detail what those conversations revealed, I want to ask a fundamental question. What does it mean for a symphony orchestra to innovate? We exist to perform classical music. It's what we do, it's who we are. Much of our deeply cherished repertoire and our rituals are rooted in the past, and let's acknowledge they are profoundly loved by millions across the country. If we lose sight of that in the eager pursuit of innovation for its own sake, we run the very real chance of innovating ourselves out of existence. On the other hand, our rich traditions and histories can also constitute an impediment to adaptation. We heard yesterday from the UAW and Ford how they had to overcome traditional business assumptions before they could find a pathway to a viable future. It's not easy or obvious, but this question of how to balance our artistic legacy with institutional innovation is a critical one, and it's one that we wrestled with throughout our American Orchestra Forum discussions this year. I'm sure you all do too every day. So with this delicate balancing act as a backdrop, let's return to the fundamental themes of the American Orchestra Forum: community, creativity, and audiences. These are large concepts, certainly, and they often overlap, but each area also addresses a specific aspect of the imperative to innovate. University of Chicago cultural historian Neil Harris observed in our October forum, talking about communities, that we orchestras generally carry our city's name, and were in large part founded as declarations of civic pride, filling both an artistic and communal need long ago. Any self-respecting city in this country needed to have a symphony orchestra that carried its name. Fast forward to today, and those very communities whose names we proudly share are asking themselves, why do we have an orchestra? Whom does the orchestra serve? I'm sure there's not an orchestra represented here today that wouldn't answer that question by pointing to many of the following activities that we all do so well under the general name of community engagement. We partner with our schools to educate our children. We celebrate local heritage events. We invite amateur musicians as adults to return to music making. We play at sporting events, city parks, senior homes, and yes, even dance clubs and bars. But if you're like me, you still find that many in our communities are unconvinced. So then we ask ourselves, in this crisis of self-confidence, doesn't our community value Beethoven anymore? I believe that it does, but our communities are not connecting what we consider to be community engagement with what we also consider to be our core activity, and that's performing classical music in our concert halls. Our institutions are well-oiled machines delivering top-notch performances to audiences in 2-hour chunks several times a week. But what appears to be a growing proportion of our communities is not so sure that's what they want. Some of them are completely accustomed to letting everyone know where they are and what they're doing at any given time and sharing how they're feeling about that experience in the moment. In this interactive YouTube, Twitter, Facebook era, shutting our audiences down electronically for 2 hours is giving them withdrawal anxiety. Yet I readily acknowledge the prospect of allowing our audiences to remain plugged in produces considerable anxiety for many in our field, myself included. I spent far too much time on American Airlines yesterday, and I picked up their magazine, which I don't do very often unless I'm truly stranded on a plane, and they had a story in there about tweet seats. And the Nashville Symphony is quoted in that article as experimenting with that new opportunity for audiences. Our institutions are well prepared to release highly produced recordings, error-free and critically acclaimed, while our audiences grow increasingly accustomed to accessing, curating, and sharing content for free and on demand in a way that they want to do it. These are all clear signals from our communities to us that the time has come to apply the same creative spirit that we bring to our music making to the concert and more broadly to the entire musical experience that we are offering. In a provocative blog post, American Orchestra Forum contributor Ben Cameron challenges us, just as he challenged our entire industry at conference 2 years ago in Atlanta. He writes, quote, "What if we saw our concert halls not as places that divide audience from artist, but as symphonic centers where we maximized every opportunity to embrace the full range of symphonic activity, including but not limited to the traditional concert, end quote. In order for us to answer our communities convincingly, orchestras have to make this type of holistic thinking an institutional imperative. We must internalize it and make it central, not just to our mission statements, but to the nuts and bolts of what we do week after week. Reconsidering our rituals and practices will involve considerable creativity, flexibility, and I would add, courage. Which brings us to the audience itself. Our audiences are diversifying at an accelerating rate, and I'm not just talking about age and ethnicity, although demographically many of our cities are shifting rapidly. I'm also talking about diversifying musical tastes and diversifying interests and expectations in when and how to experience our music. There is good news in this. Our music is being consumed today more than ever before in our history via more channels. The YouTube Symphony Orchestra concert I mentioned earlier drew over 30 million online and mobile viewers. But there are huge implications here for our core offering, live symphonic performances. We discussed this at great length in our final orchestra forum, talking about audiences, which took place last month. One of our panelists, Elizabeth Scott, who spent 12 years at Major League Baseball Productions and now holds the new post of Chief Media Officer at Lincoln Center, observed that we in the performing arts have long held that we will say what our audience's experience will be, rather than saying, here are the different ways you might have this experience. And what professional sports have discovered is that they're making their content available across multiple media platforms has corresponded with even stronger attendance at live events, which, by the way, hold tightly onto their own rituals and happen at a time and place dictated by the organization. But, to quote Elizabeth directly, if you give exciting ways in through media, they will want to come into the hall. So, we are back to inviting our communities in. The walls of our halls must become more permeable and transparent. We must be willing not only to invite the outside world in, but allow them to interact with us and empower them to take us along when they leave. This will demand innovation across all aspects of our institutions. Our staffs, musicians, boards, and patrons and donors must work together to accept that our communities and audiences' expectations are changing. We must find creative ways to ensure that the musical encounters we create are a vital part of living in San Francisco or Dallas or Ann Arbor. So how do we get there? I think, as he often is, Jim Collins does have something to say about this, a great business scholar, who argues in his book, Built to Last, that long-lasting organizations fight what he calls the tyranny of the or and embrace the genius of the and. As he says, these successful enterprises, quote, preserve a passionately held core ideology and simultaneously stimulate progress in everything but that ideology. Preserve the core and stimulate progress. A truly visionary company embraces both ends of a continuum, continuity and change, conservatism and progressiveness, heritage and renewal, fundamentals and craziness, and, end quote. I believe this is one of the keys to achieving balance. We must reject the false dichotomies that have been so central to our thinking, such as tradition versus innovation, excellence versus flexibility, artistic quality versus financial sustainability, live performance versus electronic media, educators versus performers. We must find the means, both financial and persuasive, to embrace the genius of the and, keeping one foot firmly planted in our fundamental values, while we let the other foot explore new modes for sharing them. Taken to extreme, that metaphor would have us all doing the splits. But I strongly believe, and the American Orchestra Forum conversations have reinforced that belief, that with practice and with the insights gained from talking to each other and listening to each other, we can actually achieve the flexibility that allows for the necessary calisthenics involved. To quote composer John Adams, who played a large role in our centennial and was a significant voice in the American Orchestra Forum, "The only thing we know about the future is that it is bound to surprise us," end quote. But just as we went into our centennial season knowing it was coming, we don't have to face that future unprepared. Our past does ground us. Our present stimulates and challenges us. By developing a culture of greater flexibility and openness, we can blend the best traditions of our past with the dynamism of the present and forge a vibrant future fully prepared for the surprises that await us and using them to shape the orchestras that our communities so urgently need. Thank you.